Hi, everybody. Sorry to be late. I was having a little bit of a technical problem with this one, so that's why. There's still something that I have to do, so I'm going to edit the video while it's going on. So bear with me for a minute. Okay, my sound should be better now, and I've given you some links as well. Hi, Greg. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Cora. Hi, Russell. At least I think I saw Russell just a minute ago. Steve Wolfbrandt. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. Nice to see you all. As I said, I'm sorry to be late. I had a little bit of a technical problem to resolve. It was my fault. I was careless in starting the video up, I'm afraid, and didn't do quite what I wanted with the post. So please share for me. And while you do that, I will start right in. First, I think I'll show you my face. That should be a good start. There we go. So glad to be here, as usual. How's my sound, by the way? How's my visual? I'm getting some likes. That's a good start. Okay, again, how's my sound, please? Audio and visual good. Okay, thank you, Russell. Okay, then our first topic for tonight is Bernie's path to victory. So let's start up with that. Okay, that's an article from Jacobin. I'll put my clearly on, so the extraneous parts of that are off. I put that on too soon. The author of this article is Eric Blank, and I thought he had a good theory of what was happening with Bernie. I guess I've got to show you the article at this point before I go any further. And there we go. I'll use my clearly here and wipe off the header. But this was published, okay, in Jacobin on October 1st, 2019, or yesterday. There we go. So, Eric Blank makes the point that the corporate media are ramping up their drive to isolate and attack Bernie Sanders. That's expected, of course. And he said that there's no expectation that taking on the entire political and economic establishment would be easy. And he follows with, by insisting that Bernie's star is fading, liberal pundits, the Democratic establishment, and their progressive proxies have done their best to create a self fulfilling prophecy, which has then been borne out in recent polls. But the news isn't all bad. Far from it. We're still early in the race with plenty of time for Joe Biden to continue putting his foot in his mouth and for Elizabeth Warren to falter under increased scrutiny as a front runner. And then he points out that Bernie's path to the White House doesn't really depend on what the media says or what his political rivals do. And Eric says it depends on us. I agree also. Ultimately, it depends on us. By continuing to build a deep grassroots infrastructure to turn out an unprecedented number of disaffected voters, we can win. Eric points out the dirty little secret of him. He says the dirty secret. He doesn't use a little of American democracy is how few people take part in elections, especially primaries. Faced with political institutions dominated by the ultra rich, many people understandably feel that it's a waste of time to participate. I'm sure we've all felt that way at one time or another. In the 2016 presidential primary, for example, the overall turnout was only 28.5%, and even this number was significantly higher than normal. Non-voters are disproportionately poor, young, and non-white. In the 2016 general election for president, more than half of non-voters earned less than $30,000 per year. About the same percent were people of color, and 50% were under 30. Because non-voters tend to favor redistributing wealth and rebuilding a strong welfare state, the fate of Democratic Socialist candidates usually hinges on maximizing turnout by galvanizing just enough new volunteers and voters. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her June 2018 primary by besting Joe Crowley, 16,898 to 12,880, out of 241,570 registered Democrats. So, roughly, I guess, 1/8 of the eligible Democrats actually voted in that. Of course, that was a lot more than normal, and that's why Ocasio Cortez actually won. She was able to get her voters to the poll, and as a result, she handily beat the Joe Crowley. Bernie is right to argue, Eric goes on, that, quote, if we can significantly increase voter turnout so that low income people and working people and young people participated in the political process, if we got a voter turnout of 75%, this country would be radically transformed, unquote. And that's right. If that happened in the primaries, they would all go to Bernie. That's why the polls are not prophecy. Not only do they frequently oversample the wealthy and elderly, their projections are based on normal electioneering rather than insurgent working class campaigns, which of course is the kind of campaigns that Bernie has been trying to build since he's been running. Consider an example from across the pond. Polls had the Labour Party leftist Jeremy Corbyn down by 20 points less than 2 months before the June 8, 2017 general election on June 7th. Some had him down by 13 points, yet an unexpectedly high turnout of 78%, the largest in 25 years, driven by youth and people of color, upended everybody's expectations and brought Corbyn within only 2 points of a victory. Closer to home, we can look to Bernie's March 2016 upset in the Michigan primary. I think this is, of course, the best example for his argument. On the eve of the vote, Bernie was losing by as much as 37 points in the polling. 37 points, which gave him less than a 1% chance of winning. Bernie nevertheless won Michigan and made Nate Silver eat crow by doubling the expected youth turnout, of which he won 81%, and winning an unexpected number of black and working class voters, sweeping those who were very worried about the U.S. economy. The very worried was in quotes there. Whatever the latest media hit piece, whenever the latest media hit piece gets you down, remember that the main obstacle facing the Bernie movement is not corporate media smears. A large number of people today get their news online. A larger number of people get their news online than they do from television. Okay. Among working people, particularly the young and non-white, traditional media's influence has bottomed out. Millions more watch Cardi B's conversation with Bernie than the first of the presidential debates. Now, that's something I didn't know, and it's very, very interesting. Nor is the problem, as pundits claim, that Bernie is too radical for the American people. A solid majority, including in, quote, red states, unquote, already support but legislation like taxing the rich, Medicare for all, and a Green New Deal. Not only does Bernie beat Donald Trump by a large margin in poll after poll, there are compelling reasons why he's much more likely to defeat Trump than any Democrat to his right. The fundamental roadblock standing between Bernie and the White House is the following. Tens of millions of young people and workers remain politically unengaged. Sanders has made activating non-voters a central part of his campaign strategy to win. But this apathy, quote unquote, better understood as political resignation, I think that's a very fine description of it, is a difficult nut to crack. He says, every week I canvass for Bernie at Brooklyn College, a working class commuter school where most students remain reluctant to stop and talk or register to vote. Politicians always make promises that they don't keep, so why should now be any different? With families to support, okay, and multiple jobs and classes to boot, this feeling of being, quote, too busy, unquote, for politics is common. The daily indignities of working and living under capitalism breed a sense of powerlessness compounded by the U.S. trade union movement's by dramatic decline. Absent a strong culture of working class organization, it's rational for people to seek individual solutions to collective problems. Ideally, Bernie would be running for president at the apex of a decades long upsurge in labor and socialist organizing. But we're in virtually the opposite situation today, despite a promising uptick in public and private sector strikes. Fortunately, the vast majority of those who stop and talk at Brooklyn College agree to support Bernie by the end of our conversations, whether it's healthcare costs, tuition fees, looming climate catastrophe, or institutional racism. Virtually everybody we speak with has some deeply personal grievance that's addressed directly by Bernie's platform. Our multiracial crew of canvassers is growing weekly. This then is the $64,000 question facing Bernie's movement. In the short window of the next 4 to 6 months, can we recruit and train enough new volunteer organizations to turn out millions of non voters to the polls? The campaign is already making strides forward. Bernie has the most volunteers, the most individual donors, the largest fundraising numbers, the most views on social media, and the largest rallies. That we should have no illusions about how much more work it will take. Since Bernie's main bases of support, young, low income, non white, are traditionally the least likely to vote, we face the biggest challenges in terms of turnout, but also by far the most room for organizational and electoral growth. Unlike with by traditional electoralism, the beautiful thing about Bernie organizing is that building his campaign is, in itself, a win for our side. Every new volunteer you recruit and every new voter you convince becomes part of an insurgent grassroots movement for environmental, economic, and racial justice. So political openings like this don't arise very often. We need to seize the moment to rebuild working class power by leaning on the Bernie campaign to elevate labor militancy and rebuild an organized, socialized, socialist left rooted in the multiracial working class. Regardless of the electoral outcome, only disruptive collective action by millions can force the ruling class to meet our most pressing demands. An accurate measure of the growth and strength of that movement won't be spelled out on 538. It won't be in the polls, in other words. So Blank says, ignore the punditry and take the polls with a grain of salt. For the first time in U.S. history, we have the real possibility of electing a Democratic Socialist to the White House. It's up to us to make it happen. So, according to the thesis of this article, okay, of Blank's, it's the hidden vote that normally doesn't vote that counts. And there's enough of the hidden vote in young people and the millennial millions to turn these elections around and to make the polls completely unreliable predictors. Now, I've been watching the polls, of course, since the start of this particular campaign. And Bernie, of course, has never been able to pull away from the rest of the field. He's still hanging in there. Last week was reporting that it looked like Warren had displaced him in second place and maybe even had gotten to first place because he was coming out ahead of Joe Biden in some of the polls. But now this week, things seem to have started to reverse themselves again because Bernie seems to be at least in a tie with Warren and maybe ahead of her for second place. and Biden seems to be in first place again. Now, it's no accident that so far Bernie, of course, until he had his his problem with his chest pains yesterday, and had to go to the hospital to have some stents put in. He was very vigorously campaigning all over the country, and even more vigorously during this week, because what's been going on since September 27th is a million call telephone campaign by the Bernie forces targeted on the Iowa caucuses. And there was a big ad buy scheduled for Iowa too by Bernie at this point. And I believe I heard today that ad buy was canceled, but that may only be due to the fact that the campaign has been preparing an even bigger ad buy for Iowa that we will see very, very soon. I think the initial reviews of the ad that was going to come out, okay, for Iowa was that even though it was a solid ad, it was a little underwhelming, especially compared to the first ad for Iowa that Bernie had in 2015, which was really extremely striking. It was a wonderful ad. Uh, so I think they wanted something like that. They didn't quite get it the first time around. So I think they canceled that particular ad buy, but will probably replace it with something else. Because that million call campaign, that was supposed to be a 10-day campaign. It's now gone through roughly the first 5 days or so. Still 5 days left. And they're probably knocking themselves out, calling everyone they can, targeting the campaign, okay, on Iowa, trying to turn around the situation, okay, in Iowa, so Bernie is clearly uh, uh, in the lead. So this is probably the first test of uh, the volunteer resources that Bernie has in terms of a large scale, coordinated type of operation. So we will see if that has an effect on the polls. But okay, I actually wouldn't expect it to uh, have too much effect on the Iowa caucus polls for the simple reason that the polls about the caucus probably are also biased towards older people and people who are among the wealthier people. That's the way all the polls have been biased virtually this year, with the possible exception of the Emerson College polling. So, through biasing the polls, the mainstream campaigns have been depicted as just as successful or more successful than Bernie's campaign. And of course, there was the narrative that was started by last week, which looks like it's falling down now for this week. Specifically, that something was wrong with Bernie, the magic was not there with his campaign. Uh, he's about to fall by the wayside. And why doesn't he just get out? Well, while that was going on, Bernie was mobilizing his online forces, okay, to deliver a stunning result in third quarter fundraising. Roughly figures of roughly $25.3 million for third quarter fundraising, to add to his total of roughly 38 million from the first two quarters. So this is actually pretty stunning. It's like he's gathered 63 million in three quarters with very small contributions, which are averaging $18 to $19 or so, and he has 1.4 million contributions. I think that's the number for the last quarter. He got 1.4 million contributions. It's astonishing. He certainly has now way over a million individual contributors for his campaign over the three quarters. So this is an indicator of an extremely active campaign. We will now see how successful the Million Call campaign is, but that will be another indicator, okay, of what is happening with his campaign. So my overall impression of the campaign is that his path to victory is very clear. It's in the mobilization of the non-voters, and I agree, okay, with Eric Blank on this. And thus far, from what I've seen of the campaign, it seems to be mobilizing people in even larger numbers than was the case in 2016, and in numbers large enough both to win from Trump and to beat his rivals in the primaries when it finally comes down to actual voting. This, of course, remains to be seen, and it's all contingent on the incident that Bernie has just had being just a minor incident, as it seems to be. Of course, okay, I know that we all wish Bernie well. I certainly do. And I look for a recovery that's an extremely quick one, especially since the October debates are coming on October 15th in only 13 days. But I hope that he's well enough to resume his campaigning by uh, perhaps the end of the weekend or the first part, okay, of next week. But I know he has to rest up and he should not rush his return to the campaign. But as many people have already said today, he's an extremely hard worker, very, very hard worker. Has more energy than any other 10 people, it seems. And most probably the way stents work, he's not going to miss too many steps this week. And the expectation is that he'll be fine. And I know we all keep our fingers crossed, okay, for that. But as far as his campaign is going, I guess the lesson from this article is that it's probably still going very well, but how well it's going can't be measured by the polls due to their polling models. I think there's very much to that particular thesis, that it is probably right, and we'll just have to see if it is as right as we think it is. We'll probably have to wait a few months before we find out for sure. So, The second topic I wanted to take up tonight, okay, is the contempt of Congress that Trump, okay, is showing. Here's an article that appeared in the Common Dreams. Was written by Jake Johnson, staff writer, on September 30th, 2019. The title of it is Laughably Unlawful, but do not simply laugh this off. Trump suggests that the Representative Adam Schiff, I should say, uh, should be arrested for treason. For treason. Okay, so going back to that particular claim, I'm going to get rid of what I can get rid of on this page other than the text, and now go through the article. But the basic point, okay, that's being made is that Trump has continued to lash out at his opponents in response to House Democrats' impeachment inquiry, suggesting that Congressman Adam Schiff should be arrested for treason, quote unquote. Why treason? Quote from Trump, from a tweet by Trump. Representative Adam Schiff has illegally made up a fake and terrible statement, pretended it to be mine as the most important part of my call to the Ukrainian president, and read it aloud to Congress and the American people, unquote, Trump tweeted, referring to Schiff's summary of the president's call with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky during a House Intelligence Committee hearing last week. Schiff, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, said at the hearing the White House memo on Trump's conversation with Zelensky, quote, reads like a classic organized crime shakedown, unquote, and quoted the president's request for a, quote, favor, unquote, from Zelensky. So we don't have the egregious statement quite yet, but I'm sure we will come to it. Trump claimed Schiff's portrayal, quote, bore no relationship, that's capital N, capital O, relationship to what I said on the call, unquote. Quote, arrest for treason, question mark, unquote, that Trump asked. And then there's a picture. There's a picture of the tweet right there. So there were some observers who expressed alarm at Trump's remarks, which came just hours after the president tweeted comments from a right-wing pastor who warned of, quote, a civil war-like fracture if Trump is impeached and removed, okay, from office. Quote, this is laughably unlawful, but do not simply laugh this off, tweeted political scientist David David Burbach. Quote, President of the U.S. in an official statement calling for an elected member of Congress to be arrested on a crime whose punishment includes execution, unquote. And that is the issue. Now, Trump might plead here that this was only a question mark. He wasn't saying that he should be arrested for treason. He was only asking the question. This may be a legal nicety that would apply if we were dealing with a court of law, but we're not dealing with a court of law. We're dealing with a quasi legal proceeding in the House, okay, of Representatives, specifically an impeachment proceeding. And impeachment is a procedure which provides in the Constitution a way for the legislature to remove presidents guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors and other serious offenses against the public trust. So, here we have Trump, who's accusing one of the people investigating him, or asking the question whether the man who's investigating him, or is one of the people investigating him, he's questioning whether that person is guilty of treason. Why? Trump claims that Schiff's version of the call doesn't correspond with his version of the call, with Trump's version of the call. Now let's say that's true, and let's say Schiff misstated what was in the call. Okay. Is that a treasonous activity? No, that's not a treasonous activity. Schiff would not be then guilty, okay, of treason. He might be guilty of embarrassing himself. He might be guilty of something that the rest of Congress might want to censure. But for a congressperson, such an act is not an impeachable offense. It's not even an offense that would cost him his seat. On the other hand, for a president to suggest that a congressperson investigating him should be arrested for treason is an impeachable offense, specifically because it is an act of contempt for the Congress. I believe, okay, and I recommend, I seriously recommend that the first charge on the bill of impeachment that is directed at Donald Trump should be contempt of Congress for this one act alone. In performing this act, the president was showing his total contempt for the authority of Congress in relation to their capability to remove him from the office of the presidency of the United States. There was a tweet by Aaron Rupar on September 30th, asking the question, what stage of authoritarianism is, quote, leader publicly calls for imprisonment of his political opponents, unquote, the question mark. And there's a link to the tweet there in the article. And then further, but David Rothkopf tweets, the president is calling for a member of Congress to be arrested for treason for upholding his oath of office. Yes! This will be ignored. His party will dismiss it as just another over-the-top joke. In reality, it's a serious threat to our entire system. There must be consequences. And again, I suggest the consequences should be that one of the impeachment charges on the bill of impeachment that is offered by the House to the Senate should be contempt of Congress in relation to this particular incident. In that case, the Senate will not be able to ignore it. The Republicans in the Senate will have to go on record as saying whether they agree or do not agree with this particular charge. I don't think there'll be any dispute that Donald Trump suggested that a member of Congress trying to uphold his oath of office was questioned by Trump as possibly treasonous for doing so. I don't think that is up for debate. What is up for debate, I suppose, is whether that's contempt of Congress. If the members of the Republican Party do not think it is, then I don't know what they would consider to be contempt of Congress. Trump has said that he could go out in the middle of the street and shoot somebody, and there would be no consequences. Well, maybe he also thinks that he could go into the middle of the Capitol building and shoot somebody, and there would be no consequences. What Trump is doing here in suggesting that Adam Schiff is committing treason is whipping up his own base, in a dangerous way that endangers the physical safety of Congressman Schiff. This is certainly worth a contempt of Congress charge. Trump's tweet Monday was the second time in less than 24 hours the president has accused Schiff of treason. I want Schiff questioned at the highest level for fraud and treason, quote unquote, Trump said on Sunday night. In the same series of tweets as Common Dreams reported, Trump warned of big consequences for those who gave information to the whistleblower who filed a complaint about Trump's call with Zelensky. Quote, threats against the whistleblower are not only illegal, unquote, said Kenneth Roth, executive director of Human Rights Watch, quote, but also indicative of a cover-up, unquote. Now, this is undoubtedly true, but I haven't seen Kenneth Roth say that about the various threats that have been directed at Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and various other whistleblowers over the years. So I think that by Kenneth Roth as being particularly partial here, but that doesn't change the fact that threats against the whistleblower are not only illegal, as he said, quote, but also indicative of a cover up, unquote, as he also says. So, what I say in conclusion about this is Congress must not let this go by. The House must list it as the first impeachment charge in the bill the House is preparing to send to the Senate. And furthermore, I think Nancy Pelosi should announce tomorrow that this will be the first of the impeachment charges against the president. Because this kind of talk has to stop now. It holds the Congress in contempt. It holds our institutions in contempt. It holds our system in contempt. It holds the separation of powers in contempt. He has to be stopped. The means Congress can use is to place this on a bill of impeachment. That's what should be done. So that was the second topic. Let me take a moment before I move on to the third to ask you to please share, like, and subscribe this video. Okay, and go to YouTube after I post it on there, which will happen after I finish here. And subscribe to my YouTube channel, please. And also, please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Thank you very much. So, my third topic for commentary comes from an article I also found in Common Dreams, written by Jessica Corbett, another one of their staff writers, one of my favorite writers over there. And her article was published on October 1st, and it's entitled, Despite Enormous Potential as a Carbon Sink, Australia's damaged coastal ecosystems are spewing millions of tons of CO2 into the air annually. I guess that's an annual figure. I'll again take away the chaff so you can see the wheat here. There's a caption that's under the photo that was on the article. And the caption said, quote, if we were to restore just 10% of historical losses in tropical mangroves, said study co-author Andy Stephen, quote again, this would enhance carbon sequestration by about 4 to 5%, unquote. The article starts off, Australia's seagrass meadows, the mangroves and salt marshes absorb and lock away about 20 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. That is a huge amount. But damage to these vegetated coastal ecosystems is releasing 3 million tons of CO2 back into the atmosphere. So, in other words, there's a net emission to the atmosphere of CO2 of 3 million tons per year. That too is a large number, and limiting their potential to prevent more planetary heating, according to a new study. And quote, Australia is home to around 10% of the world's blue carbon ecosystems, so there's enormous potential for us to take a lead role in this space, unquote, said Oscar Serrano of the ECU, which is the Edith Cowan University. That's the ECU in Australia. And going on with the article, the quote, world first research on blue carbon or carbon captured by the ocean and coastal ecosystems was published Tuesday in the journal Nature Communications. The study, entitled Australian Vegetated Coastal Ecosystems as Global Hotspots for Climate Change Mitigation, makes a case for restoring these areas across the globe to help combat the human-caused climate emergency. The research brought together dozens of scientists from 33 institutions worldwide, including lead author Oscar Serrano, a fellow at the Center for Marine Ecosystems Research at Edith Cowan University's School of Science in Australia. And again, Serrano said that Australia is in a position to take a leading role in developing policies to offset greenhouse gas emissions, which can then be implemented around the world, unquote. And he also said there's enormous potential for us, that is the Australians, to take a lead role in this space. The researchers found that Australia's coastal zones capture about the same amount of carbon each year as the annual emissions of more than 4 million vehicles. That's a huge amount. However, Serrano said when these ecosystems are damaged by storms, heat waves, dredging, or other human development, the carbon dioxide stored in their biomass and soils beneath them can make its way back into the environment, contributing to climate change. Highlighting the importance of blue carbon ecosystems, the ECU statement noted vegetated coastal ecosystems absorb carbon dioxide at rates up to 40 times faster than terrestrial forests, mainly due to their enormous capacity to store carbon in soils. 40 times faster than forests. That's a striking figure. Carbon sequestered in the soil. That is what we need. In Australia, it's estimated there is 4 times more carbon sequestered in soil beneath the marine ecosystems over a given area than in terrestrial environments. So soil beneath the marine ecosystems. Next bullet point, that vegetated coastal ecosystems account for 50% of carbon dioxide sequestered by the oceans, despite covering just 0.2% of its total area. That, too, is a very striking figure. Serrano pointed out that, quote, globally vegetated coastal ecosystems are being lost twice as fast as tropical rainforests, despite covering a fraction of the area, unquote. He added that, quote, these ecosystems are also important as habitats and nurseries for fish, okay, and other marine life, helping to prevent coastal erosion and improving water clarity. The researchers hope the new study will help drive efforts to restore and protect such ecosystems in Australia, which in turn could inform similar efforts around the world. Andy Stephen is a co author of the study as well as Coasts by research director at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, CIRO, really a major research organization, an Australian federal government agency. And Andy Stevens says, quote, if we were to restore just 10% of historic losses in the tropical mangroves, that is roughly an area of 1,150 square kilometers, this would enhance carbon sequestration by 4 to 5%. And quote again, with a carbon trading price of $12 per ton, for which we report in the paper. The potential for blue carbon projects within Australia alone is worth tens of millions of dollars per year in payments from the Australian Emission Reduction Fund and voluntary carbon markets. Stephen told the Australian broadcaster, SBS. Okay, now, this is interesting. Uh, And it's interesting because even though I don't know where the Australian Emission Reduction Fund, how the fund is filled with Australian dollars, I do know that if that fund is filled in some way by the government budget, then it's also true that potentially the funds available to the Australian Emission Reduction Fund, okay, are limited only by the will of the Australian government to produce those funds. Australia is one of the nations of the world that is still a monetary sovereign, and it can put as many dollars as it wants to into the emission reduction fund to really provide people with a great incentive to sequester the carbon through blue carbon projects. Quote, those projects could take the form of replanting seagrass meadows, restoring mangroves by reflooding, or by preventing expected losses through environmental management, said Serrano. Quote, these more accurate measurements of blue carbon provide more certainty on expected returns for financiers looking at investing in blue carbon projects. As Stephen explained to The Guardian, quote, when we started this work in 2014, we had no real numbers. We didn't know how significant it was or even if they were worth thinking about. But we've shown demonstrably that these ecosystems are very significant. For example, I've read this already, so just a repeat of what I quoted before, that if they were to restore just 10% of historic losses, that's roughly an area of 1,150 kilometers squared. Uh, And this would enhance carbon sequestration by about 4 to 5% in Australia. Last year, according to the tracking group, um, 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 Endeavour Environmental, Australia's annual emissions hit a record level at 558.4 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Oh, God, that's awful. The researchers call for restoring coastal ecosystems to address the climate crisis. That call aligns with the Natural Climate Solutions Campaign, which proposes, quote, drawing carbon dioxide out of the air by protecting and restoring ecosystems, unquote, to battle climate and ecological breakdown. Last month, just ahead of the global climate strike and the United Nations Climate Action Summit, youth climate activist Greta Thunberg and writer by George Monbiot, a leader of the campaign, released a video on the proposal. Let me play the video on this page. Sorry, I did not catch the sound. Let me see if I can get that around. I hope you're getting the sound on this. I'm not getting it on my system. But you may be getting it. It's only a very short video anyway, so if you go to the Common Dreams page, you'll be able to play it there. I don't know why the sound is not coming out of my system, but anyway. Oh, I see. I could not play the video by doing what I did. That's what caused the problem. I guess I need a special output to play a video even by proxy. Okay. I thought I could do that. All right. Anyway, let's see what's happening at your end. Okay, so I guess the video did not actually get to you. Okay, Russ says he's got to go. And he tells me to see you again soon. Thanks for coming, Russ. We'll see you soon, hopefully. I'll be back here tomorrow night. Let me take a look at your various comments. Greg says, good evening. Steve says, just donated to Bernie. My daughter Devora is here. Hi, Devora. Hi, Jim Bird. Hi, Lana. Hi, Jeff Ginter. Cora Emanuel says, many states do not have open primaries. Yes, I know. And Bonnie's joined. Terry Marius has joined. So welcome to you, Terry. I don't think that I've seen you before. I may have. Rich Serber has joined. Hi, Rich. Nice to see you again. Greg Mallet says Bernie is beating Trump by 3% here in Georgia. That's not a big margin. I think Bernie will catch up in Georgia. He plays pretty good catch up. And Steve points out that Bernie's interview on the Joe Rogan show has over 10 million views so far. Yeah, I know. That was a great success. Susan Eldridge has joined. And Steve Wolfbrand said, I was hoping to see Bernie this week here in LA. Oh, well. Yeah, I'm sure that's a disappointment. But he's close to LA. If he feels well by Friday or Saturday, I would not put it past him. And Dale says, it appears to me Trump is losing it in 25th Amendment time. Yes, the 25th Amendment could be used to replace him as the president, or at least to place him in an inactive state where no one could obey his orders. Dale says we're living in rather extraordinary times, and Greg says it's also dangerous. I agree with both of you. And Russ says, gotta call it a night. Dr. Joe, see you again soon. So, any other comments, statements, questions? If you could share my view that what we need now is an immediate contempt of Congress charge against Trump, uh, I'd really like to see that done. I think that's important. That what he's been doing with Schiff is absolutely unacceptable. Now, I don't like Schiff. I think he's done all kinds of harmful things in relation to the Russiagate fiasco. So I don't come here as a partisan of Adam Schiff. I mean, I don't have a dog in that particular fight, except to think that it's necessary for the president to show respect for Congress and for Congress people and vice versa. And at a minimum, that respect has to include not on the spur of the moment one's venting by saying that a member of Congress has committed a treason when there's no evidence of that whatsoever. No evidence offered, just name calling, just labeling, just insults. He's treasonous. Okay, any other comments or questions? Jim Bird says Nixon threw fits. Oh, threw fits. Yes, he did throw fits. But I don't think he publicly accused any congresspeople of treason. He may have done that in private. I suspect he did. So Dolores Pierce and Cara Emanuel and Jim Bird have joined again. I guess they were dropped and then they joined again. And Bonnie was dropped and has joined again. Steve says, but Nixon used to punch out his wife. Yes, I remember reading about that. Lanadell says, I remember reading that Nixon was paranoid, and so was Stalin. Yeah, they both were, but I think Stalin was a lot worse than Nixon. I don't think there's any comparison. Dale says, did he, Steve? Wow. Yeah, it's been known for a long time that he used to beat up on Pat. So, that was really a scare this morning, wasn't it? Yeah, when the news broke about Bernie Sanders, that was a scare. So, that was really a scare this morning, wasn't it? Okay, I don't see much. So, I think I'm going to call a night. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for staying. I don't see much. Steve says the hospital staffs actually leaked it. Well, it also could have been people in the campaign because the campaign had a meeting about it. I understood last night, actually. It was scary, though. Okay, so good night, everybody. I'm sure we'll all watch that very, very carefully. And tomorrow, it's possible I'll be talking about the job guarantee tomorrow. But if not, tomorrow I'll have a program about the job guarantee on Saturday. I got a suggestion from Lana Dell, who informed me that at the MMT conference there was some confusion about how the job guarantee program would actually work in terms of some of the implementation details. And so Lana thought I might be able to speak to that question, and I also think I may be able to speak to that question. So I'm going to talk about it either tomorrow night or Saturday night. Dale says, my mother-in-law had stents placed. She was fine. So Dale, has that actually proven to be a permanent fix? Okay, and if it was a permanent fix, is she someone who's very active, but physically? Because I think that Bernie's not going to slow down at all. I mean, he's just going to run and run and run and run. I mean, he took the meaning of running for office very literally. He takes the meaning very literally. Okay, thanks again for sharing. the meaning of running for office very literally. And please continue to share as much as you can. Okay, and but thanks for all your efforts, and have a good night. I'm going to end this now. Okay, thanks again for sharing.